My name is Mason, and this happened during my junior year of college in southern Indiana. I'd finally moved out of the dorms and into an old rented house with 3 other guys I barely knew. It wasn't ideal. We all had different schedules, different lifestyles, but the place was close to campus, had decent rent. The house itself was old, like radiator heating and creaky floors kind of old. Supposedly, it used to be a boarding house back in the 50s. Still, it was a step up from the cinderblock dorm rooms I'd been crammed into for 2 years. There was a back bedroom on the first floor that no one ever used. It was smaller than the others, and we joked it had bad vibes. Just boxes, broken lamps, some leftover furniture from people long gone. At first, everything was fine. We went to classes, partied a little, studied when we had to. Just regular college stuff. But then weird things started happening. Small at first. Lights flickering even though we had new bulbs. The sound of something shifting in the walls late at night. Doors, we'd swear, we'd closed, slowly, creaking open. I wrote it off. Old house, bad insulation, drafts, creaky wood. I told myself all the things you tell yourself to stay calm. But then I started seeing someone. A woman. It began with glimpses. I'd be walking through the hallway and catch a shape in the reflection of the glass door. Just a blur, but always in the same place. At first, I thought it was one of my roommates. But when I'd turn, no one would be there. The worst was when I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find my bedroom door slightly open. I always locked it, always, but somehow I'd wake up and it would be cracked just enough to see out into the hallway. Once, I was sure I heard breathing from the other side. Not footsteps, just slow, shallow breathing. I slept with a bat next to my bed. Then came the dreams, and by dreams I mean nightmares. So vivid they felt more like memories. I'd be in the house, alone, walking toward that back bedroom. The door would be open, the light would be on, flickering, and some woman, would be standing in the corner. Her head tilted at a weird angle, like it was too heavy for her neck. In the dream, she never turned around, but she got closer. I told my roommate Kyle about it one morning. He went quiet. "You've seen her too?" That's when I stopped laughing. He told me that sometimes when he got up to go to the bathroom at night, he'd see someone walk past the hallway mirror, but when he checked, the hallway would be empty. He thought it was just a sleep-deprived hallucination. Until now, we didn't know what to do. We weren't into paranormal stuff. We weren't superstitious, but something felt seriously wrong with the house. One day I decided to clean it out. No real reason. Maybe I thought if I took control of the space, it would stop feeling so hostile. I opened the door and was hit by the smell of old wood and dust. The window was cracked, letting in some light, but the room was otherwise dim. I started pulling boxes out and stacking them in the hallway. Most were full of junk, old textbooks, VHS tapes. One even had some moldy-looking stuffed animals, but one box near the back was taped shut with multiple layers of duct tape. I don't know why, but that one made me stop. I grabbed a box cutter and sliced it open. Inside was a stack of notebooks, composition books with yellowed pages, all filled with handwriting. The top one was labeled simply LM 1997. I sat on the floor and started reading. It was a diary, a woman's. She'd lived in the house, maybe as a tenant, maybe longer. The entries started off mundane: classes, weather, missing home. But over time, they got darker. She started mentioning shadows in the house, whispers behind closed doors. She wrote that she felt watched, even when she was alone. Eventually, her entries turned frantic, paranoid. She started writing about the back room being unsafe, about someone living inside the walls. The final entry was barely legible, a single sentence repeated over and over. I closed the notebook. Every hair on my body stood up. That night, I locked my door and pushed my dresser in front of it. No chances taken. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up to something scraping against the wall. It was coming from the other side, where the back room shared a wall with mine, like nails dragging down drywall. I held my breath. It kept going, then it stopped. A second later, I heard the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps outside my door. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. No second knock, just silence. I didn't sleep. The next morning, Kyle looked like hell. So did Jonah. All of us had heard it. The scratching, the knock. That day, we called the landlord, told him we were having issues with plumbing, mice, anything just to get him to come over. When he finally showed up, we brought him to the back room and asked him about the tenants. He went stiff, said we weren't supposed to be using that room. When we pressed, he finally told us that years ago, like decades, a student had died in that room. Some kind of breakdown, overdose, maybe suicide. The details were fuzzy, and he clearly didn't want to talk about it. We asked if her name was Elle. No response. That night, we agreed not to sleep in our rooms. We set up air mattresses in the living room, all 3 of us together like we were kids again. It felt safer somehow. Around 2:40 a.m., the smoke alarm in the back room went off. It wasn't connected to the rest of the house system. It was one of those cheap battery-operated ones, but the batteries had been pulled out days before when I was cleaning. We ran to the room. Nothing was burning, but on the far wall, written in black marker, were the words, "She lives in the quiet." We moved out 2 days later, lost our deposit, didn't care. I don't know what we lived with. I don't know if it was a spirit, a presence, or just the lingering madness of someone who'd suffered, but whatever it wasn't done. A few weeks after we moved, Kyle got a call from the landlord. The new tenant in that room wanted to break the lease early. No explanation. The room was silent. I'm graduating next semester. I haven't stepped foot on that street since. But sometimes, when things get really quiet, I still hear those 3 soft knocks. And so, the quiet room remains, shrouded in mystery, its secrets untold. This isn't my story, but I watched it unfold from my porch, so I suppose it's mine to tell. I've lived in the same quiet little cul-de-sac just outside of Asheville, North Carolina, for going on 30 years now. My husband Charles and I bought our house back when the neighborhood was still new, back when the trees were short and you could see the Smokies from our backyard. Our children are grown now, long since flown the nest. The house has gotten quieter over the years, but in a peaceful way. I spend a lot of my time outside. I have my rocking chair, my iced tea, my audiobooks, and the occasional game of online Scrabble. Most afternoons, Charles sits beside me with the sports section. We've got a nice rhythm. So when the house next door went up for sale, we were curious, nosy maybe, but in a friendly way. It sold quickly. Nice place, good porch, big backyard. Within a couple of weeks, a moving truck showed up, and that's when we met Lauren. She was in her early 30s, I guess. Petite, dark hair, pulled into a bun. The kind of wardrobe that told me she worked from home. Casual, but neat. She waved the first time we saw her and came over to introduce herself the next day. She was soft-spoken, but warm. Told us she'd just moved from upstate New York for a change of pace and a little more sunshine. Said she was a freelance designer and liked peace and quiet. I told her she'd come to the right street. Everything seemed perfect for the first few months. She mostly kept to herself, but we'd see her walking to the mailbox, watering plants on her porch, unloading groceries from her car. She always smiled and waved. But in late October, things shifted. The weather turned colder. It started with the lights. At first, Charles and I thought she was forgetful, leaving lamps on at odd hours, or the kitchen light glowing well past midnight. But then we noticed certain lights flicking on and off, seemingly at random. The porch light would blink off just as someone passed by on the sidewalk. The upstairs bedroom light would come on during the day, even when she wasn't home. Then came the sounds. Late at night, while we were settling into bed, I began hearing a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was a branch, maybe blown by the wind, but the sound was too steady, too intentional. One night, I went outside to see if it was something loose on her gutters, or maybe a shutter banging. But when I stepped out onto the porch, everything stopped, dead silent. That same night, I noticed a figure through her upstairs window. It was just a silhouette, but it wasn't Lauren. Taller, broader, just standing still, looking out into the yard. I told Charles. He brushed it off. Probably a friend or someone helping her move, but it didn't sit right. A few days later, Lauren knocked on our door. She looked more than tired. Her eyes were puffy, and her hands trembled as she clutched a Tupperware container. She said she'd made too much stew and thought we might like some. Charles took it and thanked her, but I stayed with her a second longer. "You all right, sweetheart?" I asked gently. She hesitated. Then she smiled and nodded. "Yeah," she said, "just tired." But I saw it. That flicker behind her eyes. That quiet panic people try to bury. After that, she started coming by more often. Not long conversations, just small chats. She'd wave if we were outside and come sit for a moment. Once, she asked if we had a spare flashlight. Another time, she asked if we knew a good locksmith. One evening, she stayed a bit longer than usual. Charles had gone inside, and it was just me and her. She stared off toward her house, her voice low. "I think someone's been inside," she said. "What do you mean?" She fidgeted with the edge of her sweater. "Just little things. Cabinets open that I know I closed. Closet doors I never use being ajar. Lights on when I get home." I asked if she'd called the police. She shook her head. "They wouldn't find anything," she said. "Nothing stolen. No signs of forced entry. Just signs." I didn't know what to say. She seemed so convinced, but also exhausted, frayed at the edges. I couldn't sleep. A few days passed without much incident. Then one morning, around 6:30, I was sipping my coffee and noticed something strange. Her front door was wide open, not cracked, not ajar, wide open. It was still dark out, the porch light casting a pale circle on the front step. I watched for a minute, then nudged Charles awake and told him something wasn't right. We debated calling the police. Ultimately, I grabbed my phone and walked over. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but something felt wrong. I stood at the threshold and called her name. No answer. The house was silent. Sound had been sucked out of the air. I moved through the hallway slowly, glancing into each room. Nothing looked disturbed, But then I noticed something on the wall near the staircase. A smear of dirt. No, mud. It trailed up the wall like someone had run their fingers along it while climbing the stairs. I followed it up, my heart pounding louder with each step. When I reached the landing, I called her name again. Still nothing. The bedroom door at the end of the hall was closed. I walked toward it, hands shaking. I didn't know what I expected. I reached for the handle, unlocked, and opened the door slowly. The room was dark except for the weak morning light filtering through the blinds. Lauren was sitting on the floor, legs crossed, facing the corner. Her head was tilted down, her hands resting in her lap. She didn't move, didn't react to my presence. "Lauren?" I said softly. She didn't answer. I took a step closer, and that's when I saw the writing on the walls. Dozens of phrases scrawled in black marker across every surface, repeated over and over. I backed out of the room, heart pounding. I rushed home and called. The police arrived quickly. They found her exactly as I'd described. It took them nearly an hour to coax her out. She was coherent, but barely. Told them she hadn't been sleeping, that someone had been living in the crawl space. Said she could hear him breathing. At first, they dismissed it as paranoia, a psychotic break maybe, but when they searched the house, they found it. In the crawl space, wedged between insulation and beams, was a sleeping bag, food wrappers, a small camera, and a notebook. Inside were sketches, dozens of them, all of Lauren, sleeping, reading, brushing her hair. He'd been watching her for weeks. He had gotten in through a vent near the roofline. She had changed the locks, but it didn't matter. He was never using the door. He vanished forever. By the time the search was launched, he was gone. No fingerprints, no real leads, just his little nest above the ceiling. Lauren moved out that week. We helped her pack. Before she left, she hugged me, thanked me for coming in. She was scared of what she might have done to herself. I think of her. Her house sat empty for a long time. No one wanted it. People talk. Rumors spread. Eventually, a young couple moved in, friendly enough. They gutted the attic and put in new insulation. I doubt they know the full story. Sometimes I sit on my porch and wonder if they ever hear anything in the walls. Scratching, breathing, silence that feels too heavy. And if they do, I hope they don't ignore it. When I bought my place in Colorado Springs, I was just trying to get away from everything. No big drama or fallout, just a slow accumulation of stress, disappointment, and bad decisions. I was in my early 30s, single, and working remote for a tech company out of Seattle. The pay was decent, the hours flexible, and I wanted space, physical, emotional, mental. Something my cramped apartment in Phoenix never gave me. The neighborhood I moved into was tucked between two small ridges. Quiet, woodsy, the kind of place where neighbors wave from their porches but keep mostly to themselves. That suited me just fine. Most of the homes were modern ranch styles, wide lots, well-maintained. My property sat at the curve of the road and backed up to a little patch of forest that turned gold and orange in the fall. My closest neighbor, though, had a house that stood out, not in an ugly way, just different. Taller, older, dark wood siding with ivy crawling halfway up the left side. The kind of place that felt like it had a story. It sat maybe 50 feet from my own place, closer than any other house in the neighborhood. I'd barely settled in when I met the woman who lived there. Her name was Carla, probably in her late 50s, maybe early 60s. Short white hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a sharp, deliberate way of speaking. She walked over the second day I moved in, handed me a mason jar of homemade peach jam, and introduced herself. She wasn't unfriendly, just clinical, observant. Her eyes scanned my face like she was taking mental notes. "You'll like it here," she told me. "People are quiet, respectful." I smiled and said that's exactly what I needed. We talked for maybe 5 minutes, mostly about the weather and local grocery stores, before she turned and walked back through the gate into her yard. That was the first and last time I saw her during the day. Over the next few weeks, I got my place set up, furniture delivered, internet installed. I got into a good rhythm, morning walks, work from the sunroom, podcasts while cooking. But something about that house next door started gnawing at me. At first, it was little things. A single light on in the top floor window that never turned off. The sound of metal clinking from her backyard, sometimes as late as 2 or 3 in the morning. I figured she was eccentric, maybe a night owl, whatever. Not my business. But then I started hearing the bell. It was faint, soft. Almost like one of those antique dinner bells you see in old movies. It came from her yard, always at night, always once. I tried to ignore it, but it happened again, sometimes at midnight, sometimes closer to 2 a.m. Always just one soft ring. No other sounds. Just the bell. I finally asked her about it one afternoon while getting the mail. "Oh," she said, not missing a beat. "I keep that on a timer for the deer." I asked if she fed them or something, but she just smiled and said, "They like routine." I dropped it. But something about the way she said it made me uneasy. It wasn't just odd, it was rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for someone to ask and already had a line ready. That night, I stayed up late working on a report. Around 1:45 a.m., I stood to stretch and glance out the window facing her house. Her backyard light was on, and she was out there. Carla was standing near the center of her yard facing the woods. She didn't move. Just stood, arms at her sides, staring into the trees. I watched for maybe 2 minutes before she finally turned and walked back into the house. I thought maybe I was reading into things too much. Maybe she was feeding raccoons or checking on a bird feeder. I tried to let it go until I saw the boy. I was coming back from a grocery run around 9 p.m., parking my car when I saw movement near her porch. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, barefoot, wearing a white undershirt and gray sweatpants. He darted across her front steps and vanished. It startled me. I thought maybe she had a grandson visiting, but something about the way he moved didn't sit right. I waited. Looked for Carla. Nothing. I grabbed my groceries. Later that night, I saw him again. Through my upstairs window, he was standing just outside her fence, facing the street, completely still. His face was tilted upward like he was watching the stars. I snapped a photo through the glass, but it was blank, just an empty yard. Shook me. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't buy into supernatural stuff. But I also know what I saw. The next morning, I went to ask Carla about it. She opened the door almost immediately. I asked if she had family. She narrowed her eyes. I told her what I saw. She listened without interrupting. Then, without reacting, she said, "No children here." She closed the door. The next week, things escalated. The bell rang multiple times a night. 2, sometimes 3 soft chimes, always spaced out, always between midnight and 3 a.m. Then I heard footsteps outside my window, gravel shifting, soft scuffling sounds. Every time I looked, no one was there. Nothing. Then, one night, I woke to my doorbell ringing. It was 2:26 a.m. I grabbed a flashlight. I checked the camera feed the next morning. There was a figure, small, barefoot, standing at the edge of my yard, just outside the floodlight, watching. I showed it to the police. They came out, took a statement. Nothing happened. That Friday, I came home from a walk to find a small wooden box on my porch. No note. Inside was a bell, old, tarnished, tied with dark red fabric. I didn't call the police. I was lost. I threw the bell away, drove it to a dumpster across town. The next morning, it was back, on the porch. Same ribbon, same box. That was the last straw. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. I needed space, time. When I returned 2 days later, Carla's house was quiet. No lights, no chimes. I never saw her again. A week passed, then 2. Mail piled up in her box. The lawn began to grow wild. No movement, no sound. I finally asked one of the other neighbors, an older guy named Richard who lived 2 doors down, if he'd seen her. He gave me a funny look. "Carla?" I nodded. He shook his head slowly. "Carla hasn't lived there for over a year. She passed away. Cancer." I just stared at him. "No," I said. We talked. He frowned. "That house has been empty since last summer." I tried looking her up, obituaries, property records, and she was there. Carla T. Kessler, died July 18th, house left to distant relatives. I met her in October. I still don't know who or what I spoke to in that house. The bell returns. The box with the bell? It was back again.